Hi everyone, nice to see you back on the channel. Thanks for coming by. Today I'd like to talk about a very important phenomenon in language learning, and that phenomenon is failure. There are 4 languages that I've studied to any meaningful extent. They are in chronological order: Japanese, Spanish, Russian and Mandarin Chinese. I would not say that I have failed with any of those languages, but I was very close to failing with Chinese, more than once in fact, and I learned a lot from that experience, and I would like to talk about that a little bit today. Japanese and Russian are languages that I studied pretty consistently, right through to some sort of reasonably advanced level. Spanish is a language that I studied a bit here, a bit there throughout my life. Of course, it's much more accessible than a language like Japanese, or for that matter, a language like Russian. So doing it in a straggly, dragged out fashion is something that worked, and I'm probably a reasonably strong B2 now, and generally if you get to a B2 level, most people would consider themselves to have been pretty successful with it. Chinese, and I've said this in other videos, Chinese has been a bit of a sod, and there have been times, most recently between about 12 months and 18 months ago, when I thought that Chinese had in some sense defeated me, when I felt that I had given it up for good and that I would not ever go back to it, despite the fact that I'd already sunk probably nearly 2,000 hours in it. And it is that experience specifically that I'd like to talk about today. I studied Chinese and then stopped studying it. I studied it a bit more, then I quit it, then I studied it, then I quit it. I've had an awkward relationship with it for various reasons that I will not go into here. But the last time I quit it was about 18 months ago, and I really believed that I had quit it forever. Conversationally, I was at some sort of B1 level. I'd made a lot more progress probably than most people actually ever do with Chinese. I'm talking about Westerners here, right? People who speak European languages. I'd done okay with it, but it had been slower and harder than I had expected it to be, and I reached a point where I thought, this is getting a bit overwhelming. It's going to take me too long to reach a level where I feel comfortable. I don't think it's worth it. And I quit. I only quit for about 6 or 7 months. I've been studying it quite intensively over the last year and a bit now, and I'm edging up towards some sort of low B2 level. I might even be there. It's hard to say, of course. But I'm still studying pretty intensively, and I believe that I will certainly get to a B2 level, and maybe one day a C1 if I can maintain my motivation. But that's not what I want to talk about. I want to talk about the sensation of being in that zone where you feel that you've quit and that's it. Because I thought about it a lot. I've had students studying Japanese with me, and I've had students studying English with me. And I know that some of these people have just quit, fallen by the wayside. The fact that somebody stops studying with you doesn't mean that they're not studying the language anymore, right? But sometimes you can tell. Sometimes you can tell that this process of trying to learn a foreign language has in some sense broken someone. Not in the sense that it's turned them into a gibbering wreck, just in the sense that it has defeated them and they have quit. Well, I had never been in that sort of position before until I had this period of 6 or 7 months when I felt that Chinese had done that to me. And I'm quite grateful for that experience, because it has given me a lot of insight into what other people go through when they quit, when they just give up on a language and say, I can't do it, man. For whatever combination of reasons, I can't do it. When we decide to study a language, we study it in some sense on the basis of an image that we have in our heads of us being a person who can speak that language. One day I will be somebody who can speak Japanese. Some of my Russian students created similar images of themselves being people who could speak English and speak it quite well. And when that image basically shatters, when you realize that you're never going to be that person, when you realize that there are other people who've managed to do it, but you, for whatever reason, are never going to be one of those people, it is not a very pleasant sensation. My position was a bit easier. I'm talking about my experiences with Chinese here. My experiences my experiences were a bit easier than that. I'd already learnt Japanese and Russian to an advanced level, Spanish to a sort of B2, if I'm having a good day, maybe even a C1 type level. So Chinese was, in a sense, another feather that I was trying to put in my cap, and that I had, as far as I was concerned at the time, failed with. But it hurt. It burnt me a little bit. I had that image of myself as someone who had not only learned Japanese and Russian, but who was going to learn Chinese too. Look at me, look at how amazing I am. Whoa, how many people do you know who can do that? And that fragment of my self-image took a bit of a beating when I quit Chinese. And one of the reasons, certainly, that I went back to it when I did, and that I'm still studying it now quite intensively, is raw ego. That sort of atavistic ego element in language learning can be quite important, and not only in language learning, in the development of any sort of skill or any sort of accomplishment. Don't underestimate it. Don't underestimate how powerful it can be. I have definitely come back to Chinese partly because of that raw element of ego. There are some practical reasons, career-related reasons, if I can speak properly. There are travel-related reasons. There are my interests in Chinese culture and history that have brought me back to Chinese. But there's an element of raw ego to it. I do acknowledge that, and I understand that when people fail with languages, their ego is going to take a hit. If you've announced to the world that, hey, guess what, you're learning Japanese and yeah, you're going to be able to speak it one day, then when that dream goes up in a puff of smoke, it's going to be pretty tough in a sense if you've announced to the world that this was a project that you were working on. And if you've been sinking a lot of time and energy into it, and perhaps money as well, you're going to have to reconcile yourself to the fact that you have failed and that effort didn't go anywhere. When human beings end up in situations like this, we tend to try and convince ourselves that it was worth it. We got something out of it. We got some insights into a new culture. We enjoyed the process of learning. 95% of this stuff is basically, it's a story we tell ourselves to try and make ourselves feel better about our failures. If you spend 2,000 hours studying Japanese and you're still cruddy at it, despite the fact that you also sunk maybe a couple of grand into it, if you spent all that time in the evenings after work hammering kanji and trying to listen to podcasts in Japanese and still can't do any of this stuff properly, that is going to hurt. And there's something about languages, I think, and the way in which they act as portals into other countries, other peoples, other cultures, that makes them particularly painful in a sense when we have failed to learn them. If you take up the trombone and you don't like it, and you play it for a while, then you can quit and you think, I used to play the trombone, whatever, cool. And then someone tells a funny trombone story and you can tell your funny trombone story and it's like, hey, cool, whatever. But with languages it burns. With languages it leaves a mark, I think. Because we feel the beginnings of a connection with a whole other country, a whole other culture, a whole other group of people with their own way of doing things. We feel that a door is slowly starting to open and then it gets slammed shut. And that one hurts. And it makes us feel like failures. And of course we are failures sometimes when that happens. I spent a lot of time thinking that I've either turned out to be or that I will turn out to be a failure with Chinese. I've come too far with it now. And because I have the spare time to work on it, I know that I will get at least to a B2 level. Because I can feel my progress. I've done this before. I know how I'm progressing. I know that it's possible. But Chinese burnt me, I have to admit. It burnt me, not only in the sense that it was harder than I thought it would be, but in the sense that it made me feel like a real failure. And there aren't many intellectual pursuits in my life that have made me feel like a failure. I've failed in other respects. Things have gone wrong for me. I've mucked things up. Things haven't worked out. There are disappointments and failures in my life, believe you me. But in terms of failing to acquire a cognitively demanding skill that we were trying to acquire, No, Chinese is the only thing that's put me in that position for any significant period of time, to any significant extent. And I'm actually quite glad. I'm actually quite glad of that lesson, because it's not easy in life to empathize with people who are suffering things that you yourself have never suffered. And I would say that having been in that position of sort of quasi-failure with Chinese for a period there, that has increased my understanding of people who end up in that sort of situation, and my empathy, the degree of empathy that I have with them. And that, as a human being, that's worth something. And as someone who teaches languages, it's worth something. Definitely it's worth something. To be able to understand to a greater extent what people are struggling with. But failure is a real topic in language learning. Anyway, that was a blather. By all means, let me know what you think of that in the comments. If you have anything you'd like me to talk about or make a video about, let me know. I'll try and do it. But that is it for today, so I'm going to bid you adieu, or however you pronounce that word, and say ciao ciao, bye bye.